Good evening. Ooh, coming in hot. Everybody awake now? I'll move it down here. Jonathan, we good? We good? I'll put it down here, up here. Hey, good evening. Welcome. It's a little bit of a different Wednesday, and hopefully you know that you are here for the start of an evangelism class. And you're like, wait a second, what? So if you're finding out for the first time, tonight is the first night of our evangelism class titled You've Gotta Ask, and I want to invite up our teacher, professor, doctor, we'll pastor, we'll call you whatever you can. I'm Pastor Matt. I get to serve as the executive pastor here, and
Thank you.
Yeah, Pastor Kirk is not here tonight, but I actually have a cool privilege and honor to get to introduce to you John Strain, and we go way back. I mean, probably a really long time. I've hit many golf balls in your backyard.
You have, and you owe me for that. He's probably hit my house.
I mean, not on purpose, but I actually got to minister with, two of your kids through different avenues. So
that's right.
Super fun to have you. But John, could you tell us a little bit about You've Got to Ask and a little bit about yourself before we jump in, so that everybody that is in here kind of knows you a little bit more?
Well, I'll be talking a lot about that, but it is the name of our ministry, and this book came out about a year and a half ago. We were with a national organization for about 20 years and doing the same thing, but we wanted to customize to the Intermountain and the West in general. And so we took off and started our own thing. And I'll tell you specifically, I'm going to get into the You Gotta Ask and what that's about. But essentially, we are inviting people to take a next step towards God, starting with a compelling question. And then we finish out with curious listening. And so we create these relational settings for people to, whether one-on-one or in a group or a dinner or all kinds of settings, to engage that way.
Very good. So this is a class that's not just here, but we wanted to take advantage of our Wednesday evening so that more people could understand what they were getting into. But we will have the class continuing on after this week in Building 500. So if you are interested in continuing on, hopefully you all are, go ahead and go to our website and sign up. But John and Pam Strain, they're authors of this book that you're going to be going through, and you've been doing ministry in the Valley for how long?
Since 98.
Since 1990.
97, actually. I moved into my house in 98.
1998, since 97. Wow, so I was a sophomore.
Third grader?
Sophomore in high school. Anyway, so it's my privilege to get to introduce you, John Strain.
Thank you, Matt.
Yep.
Well, what a privilege. And you got to ask. I really look forward to this class with this church because I've known this church since 1998. And I know a lot of people here. We've had a lot of friends. People on the elder board, currently John Myers on my board, and he's back there, and he's does Send Hope, really involved with that. And you know, my notion about you all, Calvary Chapel, over the years is this is a ground game church. There's a lot of connection, relationally, person to person with the community, and I just love that about you and the history. And I know I'm probably catching some of you are going, well, we've been here 6 months. but you know, this is tonight and the next 4 weeks are going to be an opportunity to raise our game a little bit in that area of evangelism and our witness, or some of us prefer to call it missional living. And I'm good with that too. I think the younger crowd likes that. So you got to ask, you, the Christ follower, you, the witness for Christ, the person who's called to proclaim the good news. Paul says, you are an ambassador for Christ. It's as if God were entreating through us, be reconciled to Christ. And so we have this very distinguished role. It's interesting to me how quickly he pushed his 12 out and gave them some game. And it was a one-liner when he sent them out. Do you remember that? Kingdom of heaven is near. Everybody repeat. The kingdom, that's our message, you know. Well, the king is here. The king is near. And he is the king. And so he pushed them out, and they had quite a time, you know, coming back, reporting how that went. And you can see Jesus just working with them throughout. So the you is about you following him in your life patterns. And in fact, he said, follow me, and I'll make you become fishers of men. Isn't that cool? So doesn't it follow if you're following that you'll be fishing? He's making you a fisher of men. And so that's like an amazing privilege for us. We could go off on fishing metaphors all night on that, but we won't. So I have a handout for you. Jonathan is going to start. It's kind of a rinky-dink little looking thing, but you guys, the gotta part is the imperative of you got to ask, and the ask is what we actually do, the operative word. And I am a bit of a researcher about this kind of thing. I think about this stuff all the time. We were in campus ministry a number of years. We were in Utah. We were at the University of Utah and BYU. I started learning there a lot of the things that made us more fruitful and had a better relationship with the communities we were in. And when you're at BYU, you got to mind your P's and Q's. But we figured out a way to roll there, and it has everything to do. In fact, that was probably the genesis of this. We moved here, planted a church, and I wanted to be doing more personal evangelism and equipping people that way. And we also are into relational apologetics. And we say that way because we're not just about answering questions, we're about answering people. And so that requires getting to know them in their context and to know why they're asking the question that they are. So we spend a lot of time getting to know them before we open our mouth, trying to apply some answer, But you got to ask. So this handout is a little effort on my part because I didn't know what I was dealing with here for size of a group. And it will help if you're seated next to somebody because you're going to have a study buddy. And I don't care who that is. It could be your spouse or a friend you came with. But, you might position yourself just in proximity. You can be in the row behind if you want. These are going to be short, spurt little interactions. And believe it or not, I really value what you're going to write down because I'm going to ask you to jot a note or two down, and they'll be or put an X on a line or things like that. And I'm going to be looking at that because it matters to me, and it's going to help me help more people. And so what you get at the end of our time tonight is if you hand this in at the book, there's the visitor welcome center out there. There's a bunch of books, look like this, and you trade that in, and you can take this book. Yeah, and then we're going to be using this book the next 4 weeks, and I don't know where we'll be, but we'll be somewhere in this building. And Jonathan, how you doing with those? Good, okay. Thank you. So C.S. Lewis said, there are a couple of things in Mere Christianity that really propel me. One is in the introduction. He said, I could have done a lot of things. In terms of when he became a Christian, he went from atheism to agnosticism and became a Christian at some point. And he said, I could have gone and engaged with all of the theological debates with the churchmen, the Anglican church and just people, because he's a heady guy, so he could have fit right in with that. But he said, that's pretty well covered. Now, to understand his line that I want to share with you, you have to understand he fought in World War I, so he's got kind of a military image in his mind. And he said, I want to go where the line is the thinnest. That's where I'm going to go shoot my bullets, so to speak, and engage. And I was really struck with that. And I'd say that's a lot why I'm in the position, why we wrote this book, why we're doing this ministry, is really because we're struggling with this. And we're going to describe the nature of that in a moment about our evangelism, and we'll get to that. But The other thing is he said, and this was later in book 3, chapter 10, the chapter on hope. And he said, he says, I kind of see my job, my role is to equip people for the true country. And really speaking of the eternal future. And I really jive with that too. Because, in the end, it's just going to be people with God or not. And so we come seriously to this thing that we've got this little window of time here. None of us can measure our days. We just don't know. We're always surprised. Somebody goes out quickly with something and you go, oh my gosh, they were so young. We don't know how many days we have. And so we want to spend those days with wisdom. And is there any more wise way to spend our days than to win people to Christ? Winsomely. And that's what we're about. So, I want to ask you, comes to the first question. I hope everybody's got a pen. Everybody's got a piece of paper. If you look at this research, and I'd like you to disclose, maybe think about, why are you here tonight? And just put, I'm here tonight because, and just fill that blank. It might be just a word or a short phrase. That's fine. A sentence, maybe 2 or 3 points. And I'm going to have you just kind of jot that down. And then identify somebody in proximity that doesn't look unfriendly, and say, would you be my study buddy? And we're just going to take 30 seconds each to kind of answer that question. But I'd like you to just think about your own motive for coming tonight, why you're here, what your expectation is. So let's do that. Okay, so go. And I'm keeping a timer up here too. I'm watching it, so I'll say time. 30 seconds each. You can do a threesome if that works too. Okay, second person answer if you haven't. And then I'm going to ask you another question. Take your time, but hurry up. Okay. So I have another question there, and I want to get to this before we jump into some things. My personal need and motivation to grow, increase, and expand in missional living, witness, evangelism. What is your personal need in that and motivation? What are you motivated to grow in? What is it that you seem to be kind of just stuck in? And you're trying to think about moving ahead. And so really, I'm going to, there's kind of an extreme here first. I want you to just kind of mark off on one side, the one, I don't even think about it. I never think about this. I don't care. I don't even know why I'm here. Okay, so then over on the 10 is, I think about it a lot. And so maybe you have a number there. You can put a circle around that number or an X, whatever is easier. And then I'd like you to maybe describe with your study buddy, just exchange a moment, like, why did you put it there? What is that? What is that? So. Okay, second person answer if you haven't yet. Or third person. All right, if you haven't had a chance, go ahead and finish jotting your answer or your thought down. And we'll pull it back. I want to thank you for interacting, by the way. We're just kind of warming the engine up here a little bit. So I was a speech major at Idaho State. Back, you don't even hear about speech degrees anymore, but it was a traditional speech program, and we had, of course, focused on rhetoric, the art of persuasion. But there's, Aristotle was, we studied Aristotle just up the yin-yang. I mean, it was full immersion into the theory, Aristotle's theories on that. But one area that was a little underdeveloped for me, and I discovered this later, was Aristotle's ethics. And, he had an interesting paradigm. He said that for every virtue, there are two vices on the wings. One of them is a deficit, and the other one is an excess. But then there's something right here that's, you just kind of know it. And the classic illustration is courage. You could say, well, courage is virtuous, and probably just about everybody on planet Earth would agree about that. And then you go, well, what's the opposite of courage? Or what would be a vice for that, a deficit vice? Anybody want to take a guess? You're afraid to. You're cowards. No, it's coward is the answer. Coward is the answer. And so there's one, but then he goes, and sometimes we just think about it, you're either courageous or you're a coward. But actually he says there's another vice that's excessive, and it's the person where foolhardy brashness, is in play. So, and now it looks more like courage, but it might be foolish. And somebody's just charging the line like an idiot, and you kind of, But it's interesting that my friend Scott, he's a West Point guy, he's a TAC helicopter pilot. We were talking about this whole thing of courage, and he's led some groups into Afghanistan and that kind of thing. In fact, he wrote the Leader's Guide for You Gotta Ask. And Scott, we were exploring this whole thing of courage. And there's a bit of a definition that I've worked with, and I tried it out on him, and he said that's really it. It's feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Doing the right thing. And so it's not the absence of fear. In fact, just by definition, if it requires courage, then you are feeling afraid probably. But we can go to these extremes. So I want to bring up a familiar story to you to help you kind of really lock in on this. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Is there anyone in this room who's never heard that story? Okay, you dare not put your hand up. So this is the classic children's story. Everybody knows, so simple. And you remember Goldilocks comes to the cabin in the woods or whatever, and nobody's there, so she comes in, she's a little tired, she finds a chair to sit in, and whoa, that's a little hard. So she moves to the next one, whoo, a little soft. And then she goes to the third one, she goes, that's just right. So then she goes, she smells something, and she goes, I'm a little hungry. That's kind of making me, and so she finds the table, and there's 3 bowls of porridge. So remember, she eats out of the first one, and it's a huge bowl. She goes, man, that is too hot. How about burn my mouth? And then the second one, too cold. But then she goes to the smallest bowl and starts to eat, and she goes, it's just right. We all know just right. Then she gets a little sleepy after filling her tummy, and she sees some beds, and so she makes her way over and jumps into the big one, the huge, and it's too hard. Moves to the second one, remember, it's too soft. But then she looks at the little one, she goes, that's about my size anyway. And so she jumps into it and just goes fast asleep because it's just right. Yeah. So anyway, the bears come and disrupt her and chase her off. And that's the end of the story. But here's the thing about when I think of, okay, so Papa Bear, his stuff, his chair, his bowl, his bed are hot and hard. You could say they're a little excessive. Mama Bears are a little soft and cold. So there's a little bit of a deficit with hers. But Baby Bears is just right. And that's what Aristotle's talking about. So let's apply that to witness here for a moment. I think that if we were honest, I think we would feel that we probably run between two extremes in this area of sharing our faith. Some of us run a little hot. We might think we know some stuff, or we're just kind of outgoing, maybe a little more out there, willing to put our stuff out. And sometimes we can kind of overwhelm people and run over them. We ramrod Bible verses, and they're going, whoa, 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 cool down here. And then there's another side, and probably more of us, especially in our current culture, that, boy, you just don't want to stick your head up. And so we tend to run a little cool, a little soft, because we don't want to make waves. We're not quite sure. And sometimes there's a paralysis that sets in with this side. And it's my friend David Wilson, who in Nashville. David was in the 1984 Olympics, he was a swimmer. He won a gold with a relay, and then he won a silver individually. And so he went into business, and later he started working with the same organization we were with for 20 years. And he had an interesting way of putting this. Dave's a performer, he's an achiever. He likes doing stuff. But he found himself sitting in church, and then the message on evangelism would come up, and he'd just sit there and go, I know I should, but I don't really know how, and I'm afraid, so I don't. But I know I should, but I really don't know how, and I feel afraid, so I don't, but I know I should. And he just got into this infinite loop of paralysis of just talking himself out of it, feeling guilt and shame because he's not doing anything with it. And if you stop and think about, well, why don't I know what to do? Here's what I hear from folks most of the time. I'm kind of going to blow this question up. I'm not going to tell you yet. I want you to think about this a moment. If you turn your page over, look, we're on page 2 already. And we're just barely started. Okay. So you see here the vice, the excessive plus, and the vice, the deficit version. Virtue, just right, if you're going to fill the blank in. So here's the question. Where are you on the continuum that I just described? Are you a person who runs a little bit hot, a little hard, a little too assertive, and you're finding people are going, whoa, hey, chill here? Or are you the other side, the other extreme? I see hands going up already. Who just says, I'm kind of afraid to stick my head up. And it might be for the Dave Wilson reason. But why don't you look at this? I want you to put an X on that continuum there. Where do you think you might be? And you know what? I'm going to give you special permission tonight because you're looking at a bipolar witness. I err on both sides. I have badly. If we could have a walk of shame tonight, I could tell you stories. I might tell you a couple. But I have flung from one side to the next. And sometimes I go one side because I was too much on the other. But it does raise the question about what's just right. So some of you at least will mark one. Where's your basic tendency? Are you a little bit deficit, too cold, too soft? Or are you a little too much on the too hard, too hot? And I want you to just put an X on that line. If you do that for a moment, think about that. And some of you might be like me and you go, I'm bipolar too. X on both sides. And then I'd like you to discuss that a moment with your study buddy. Why did you mark it there? And if you would, write maybe your comment, just a phrase, a short sentence, and just kind of summarize what you might have shared with them. Okay, we'll take just 30 seconds each. We're just identifying ourselves. What kind of criminal are we? No, I'm just kidding. But. Okay, everybody got a little, if you've written your thought down too, appreciate that. We're doing research. Okay, so I thought maybe it'd be interesting. I wish we could just have all of us talk, be able to share with the group. But I want to tell you a couple of stories right out of the blocks. I came to faith in 1978, and just the quick part of that is that I was senior year, dating a girl who's not a Christian, springtime, we're just driving around talking after school. I don't know why. We pulled into a cemetery. It was overlooking the Bitterroot River, and we're still just talking. And so the conversation, and she's kind of leading it. She just starts getting off into, what do you think will happen when you die? Kind of just being kind of philosophical, just eclectic things. And then she looked at me and she said, what do you think's going to happen when you die? And y'all, it's almost as if she had a cup of gasoline and just went like this and threw it on an open flame. Because I just went, whoo. And I said, you know what? I don't know. I'm tired of this conversation, and I want to get the HE double hockey sticks out of here. And you guys, that was the end of that discussion. But it was not the end of the question. That thing dogged me for 2 months. That was probably in April. And in June, I left Hamilton, Montana, drove down with a friend. We had jobs in Southern California, Palm Springs, Palm Desert area. And we're there, and guess what? I could not outrun that. It just hunted me. I was up a tree. And you know what was going on is that I was just incredibly guilty. And I think I was under major conviction by the Holy Spirit, who convicts the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. The humorous thing is that he used my non-Christian girlfriend's really good question. She didn't even know it. It was just a curious question. She didn't even know it. She wasn't trying to do anything like that. And I just blew up. Here's the other funny thing. I had the answer. I was a confirmed Lutheran. I knew John 3:16. That was the only verse I knew. But I knew John 3:16 because Monday Night Football, probably. I actually memorized it in Sunday school, Mrs. Gerloff's class. I remember that. And then I was on the inside watching Monday Night Football. Most people thought that was John Madden's weight, John 3:16, but it wasn't. It was, for God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. Guys, I should have had the answers. Felt like I was on the perishing side. And it was a very desperate place to be, and she cut me. And I'm trying to put my guts back in and get away. And I did. But you know what? I showed up in Palm Desert, California, as guilty as I was in Hamilton, Montana. And it was worse because I couldn't blame anybody else. I had people to blame, but I was the only one who showed up. And then I'm kind of really thinking a lot about death. I don't know why. We had a couple of near misses in the car driving down, and I'm even more rattled. And I got exposed to a very affluent gated community, and I thought, this is it. This is where it's at. And I'm going to say it this way because it's just the way I interpreted it back then. I was shocked because I had a job, and I'm moving in and out of these homes and doing landscaping and putting in sprinkler systems, and I've never met such a bitchy, whiny group of people, honestly, in my life. I don't mean to excuse my Montanan, but I was shocked. I was so disappointed. And I went, wow, so this evidently doesn't really deliver to the soul. How can you live in a place like this and be like that? So everything just got dashed. And so I had enough deposits, a praying mother and other people making deposits in my life, just exposures to thing here and there. And I noticed people talking about a relationship with Jesus. My Jesus was a little bit mamby-pamby. He was kind of wore a toga, carried lambs around. But then I started hearing and reading some stories about a more robust lion like Jesus who had a big chest. And people dying for that. And I read, some interesting books. One was The Persecutor, Sergei Kordakov, who was a Russian KGB agent who converted to Christ. And I went, wow, that's some like paying a price, for this. And I thought, why would somebody do that? What is it about? Maybe there's something about Jesus I don't know that I haven't visited. And so I began to rethink that a little bit. But mostly, he was just drawing me. And you know what? There was no one in my studio apartment the afternoon that I got on my knees and went palms up in Palm Desert, except the Holy Trinity. They were closing on me. And it was a very powerful, very emotional time for me. And I said, God, I just ask you to forgive me for all this. I know that's why Christ died on the cross, and I want you to give me eternal life and the abundant life that I now know, spoken of in John 10. And also, I just need a leader. I need to come under new management because I'm doing a horrible job with my own life. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so that was a big dramatic moment. So I knew something happened, you guys. And I go, okay, this is going to be different now. I don't know how. I didn't have any idea what I'd just done. And it made me a little nervous. But so I thought, well, I better tell Karen, the girlfriend. So I wrote her a letter and just kind of put it out there as best as I could explain it. And I get a letter back, and this is before texting and emails. And we had to wait a week or more, for things. And so I get this letter back, and she's kind of hot. She goes, don't you preach at me, And I thought, man, I must have like come off kind of strong in my letter that she would push back, because then a part of me wanted to go, well, you started it. You asked that dumb question in the graveyard, And but actually, it was really interesting. I thought, ooh, too hot, too hard. But I wish I had the letter so I could analyze it. Now, I don't know if I could even understand it. Well, so that was disappointing. And then shortly after that, I got back to Montana. We were actually driving, a childhood friend and I. We'd done sports and we just knew each other very well. Driving to Idaho State, and we're in his car, and I'm sitting here going, I've got to tell. How am I going to tell Bill? And then Bill started talking about, man, when we get to school, we're going to party, we're going to do this and that, and I'm going, oh no. I've got to tell him, but I don't really know what to say. So I'm sitting there, and finally I just said, Bill, there's something I got to tell you. I gave my life to the Lord. Oh, might as well drop the microphone, thud. And that was the last thing we said to each other, except for, shall we get gas in Idaho Falls? It was so awkward. And I was just cringing afterward. I thought, oh, why did you have to do that? Well, that was stupid. Kind of kicking myself. So both of these stories were like immediate walk of shame experiences on the two vice extremes here. And I had no idea what just right was or if it even existed. So I get to Idaho State, and I'll tell you this a little bit, just a bit of this story. I want to get into more of this later. But I met a group there known as Cru, now Campus Crusade back in the day. And they kind of took me in, and a staff member began to make deposits in my life and just kind of helped me to understand who I was in Christ and how to grow. And then one day they said, hey, we do a lot of training in how to share your faith. And so there were two things they did for me. They said, here's how to write your own story up in a way that's pretty succinct, and it gives a little explanation of how you met Christ, what was going on before, and why you met him, and why you became a Christ follower, and what's happened, how he's changed your life. Man, that was extremely valuable. And then they did one other thing. They introduced me to a question and a pathway. And actually, the question was, have you heard of the 4 spiritual laws? And the pathway was a little booklet that had a very concise, well-described, simple, not simplistic, but simple, clear presentation of the gospel. And I basically just had to read through it and had a few questions to interact with people on it. And back in those days, it really went over well, because modernists, it had this phrase, have you heard of the 4 spiritual laws? And most people go, no. And then in the booklet it says, well, just as there are physical laws that govern the physical universe, so are there spiritual laws which govern one's relationship with God. And then you go, would you care to hear what they are? Now, to a modern scientific mindset, that's kind of what we were back then. We're not that now. That's kind of compelling. And you kind of go, I probably better hear those out, find out what's going on here. And so I learned how to do that. Now, I went down for pipe welding. You all have to take that by faith. I was going into a 2-year pipe welding program. I talked to everybody in that program. I went into the booth during the break, and I just posed that question to them and said, I got something I'd like to talk to you about. Pose the question, here's the premise. And every one of these very hard guys sat and heard me out. And I had amazing responses. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I'm just like totally green. I don't know up from down. But somebody gave me a good question. And then they posited it well in the cultural context with just their physical laws. And then there's a clear path explanation. And that's what you got to ask is, we're still putting out compelling questions. What is a good compelling question to use? And then we're saying, well, here's this cultural context we're in. So some of you, have you heard of James K.A. Smith? Has anybody read any of his stuff? Anyway, he was trying to translate a very smart philosophy professor in Canada named Charles Taylor. And Taylor had talked about this thing called the immanent frame. And it's for postmodern type people. We kind of see the world. It's almost like this. In fact, a cell phone is a good illustration. But this is our world. I kind of look at everything, and there's kind of, we'll say that this is the boundary of the here and now, and this is it, and I'm the authority. I'm God of my own life, and I'm the authority about what truth is and how I'm going to roll and what I'm going to do. And so this has presented a real interesting challenge. So our culture kind of shifted out of the going external to look for truth to going more internal in how am I experiencing truth. And so it's been a huge shift. And it's very confusing. And it's hard to deal with. So we've noticed that the 4 laws wasn't as effective. I was noticing that in the late 80s when I was on staff. And yeah, it was still useful, very useful, and I still use it sometimes, but I don't lead with it. So here's what we found was just right for that, what we're discovering. If we come into the postmodern mind in the culture that we're dealing with, we can ask questions. You know what? Questions hijack the brain. If you didn't hear that in my story with Karen, her very innocent, curious question just hijacked me. And they're sticky. And so what if we were to come up with some great questions that people not only, kind of arrest their attention. Anytime you ask a question, people want to help. They want to answer. They stop. You could be in a big argument, and if you just ask a question, you stop them in their tracks. I don't know what it is about the brain. We just brings us to a halt. It's an amazing thing, and that's science, by the way. People have discovered that and well documented that. And so business literature is starting to move into this realm of asking great questions. You wouldn't believe how much stuff is out there. I have a friend, a new friend. I knew about him, and then later somebody reintroduced us. He had been with Josh McDowell Ministries for many years. He was kind of a right-hand man to Josh. And so Bob retired, but he had this bug in him to keep going, and he calls himself a curator of great questions. And so Bob will look around and harvest all kinds of things. He asked us if he could use our first chapter in our book and put it on his, send it out as a feature. Of course, we were happy to do that. But so I jumped onto his little web page and started getting emails from him, and it's called Lead with Questions is the name of it, Bob Teedy. I would really recommend that. If I don't Lead with Questions, an amazing research, but he kind of focuses a little bit more on business fronts, but he covers everything, and I'm just always stimulated. I'm overwhelmed almost, but I've decided, I want to be an artisan of great questions. The book, this book here, You Got to Ask, features one question that we've had a lot of fun with, and it always gets a response. And I'll share with you what that is here a little bit. But with that, what is the path afterwards? Now, we're still dealing with postmoderns, and they're like this. The amazing thing is they're really kind of open about God, and you can talk to them about God and spiritual things, anybody. I'm just shocked at how open people are, but you have to use a question and listen well to get in the door. Curious listening, following a compelling question, does amazing things. So Bob, I noticed he's got, by the way, one of his books. So he's got one here, the little book, a big, leading with question quotes. It's a long title. Great leaders ask questions. And then he goes, now that's a great question. That's good. And now this one ought to interest you. Here's a couple of them that go into the Bible. 339 questions Jesus asked. I have another friend who wrote a book called Questioning Evangelism, Randy Newman. It won a gold medallion a number of years ago. And it was all, and Randy comes from a Jewish background, and he's hilarious to listen to him talk about this because Jewish people will never just give you an answer. They answer with a question. If you ask them a question, they'll shoot one back at you. You will see Jesus doing that a lot. And what you throw back challenges the assumption of the person that asked you the question in the first place. It's really interesting. But 339 questions. And Bob just went through the Gospels and Revelation and any other quoted places of Jesus and harvested those. And that's a lot. And then he just came out with this, 262 questions Paul, the apostle of Christ, asked. And he probably asked half of those in the book of Romans. If you've studied Romans, you know it is a give and take with Q&A. He's arguing with somebody we can't see. But that's an amazing thing, y'all. So it's all over the place. And by the way, Bob signed every one of these books with a question. He puts his name. And he goes, well, like, here's this book. Now that's a great question. So his thing is, what's the greatest question you've ever been asked? Signed Bob Tiede. You know, every one of these books, there's a question in it that he put in there and then signed his name. And I thought, you just never. I watched him do a live thing with David Alexander and some business guys, something called Convene. And I got to go in 2 or 3 times to be a part of this. And so Bob was piped in, and he led the entire thing on Lead with Questions with questions. I couldn't believe it. I go, this guy's like a maniac. And it's just hard to get him off track. But it was very effective. David brought him in. He was aware that I had met Bob, so he invited me to be a part of that. But David Alexander did something really nasty to these guys, these are business execs and owners. And so we came to a time when they would tell stories and kind of what's going on in my life and business. And so David said, okay, so here's the thing. Here's the rule number 1. You can't interrupt the guy while he's telling his story. You have to just listen. And then when he's done, no advice. You can only ask questions. And I want to tell you that stretched that room. Everybody in there is like, ah! You know. So I pulled the same stunt with our Friday morning group, right, John? So I sent a question out. And my question to these guys was, here's what we're going to discuss, but there's going to be some rules. So here's the question. How have you been experiencing God lately? Here's the rules. Okay, you got a timer, so we're going to put a certain number of minutes. And then secondly, nobody can interrupt you, though. So it's yours. It's your microphone. And then when we're done, I said, you can't make comments. You can only ask questions. And it really stretched. So John was snipping at me in the text. He goes, what are you making us do these rules for? but you know, in a group, you can invent rules for a temporary amount of time. But I think this is a discipline I'm going to keep leading my groups with. Because here's why. Bob Tiede says, I need a 12-step group. He goes, I'm a teller. I need Tellers Anonymous. He goes, I just don't naturally ask questions. I'm not naturally curious. I just want to tell people stuff. And so is there a 12-step group for tellers? We would all be in it because we're just addicted to imposing information on people like I'm doing right now. I've run out of questions to ask you guys. I think you're tired of these discussions. So, but it's a really game changer when it changes how you think about things. And I noticed for myself, I became more empathetic when I was sitting there working at asking a question. I have another group. There might be some motor mouths in our Friday group, right, John? But I have two guys in another group that really can, they can really talk, and they will hijack and command attention, And so I put this rule up in that discussion, and I said I'm going to keep it in this group because we need this. But you can imagine how people open up when we will just ask a compelling question and stay there and listen to them. I don't know why I remember this, but my grandfather, I was probably junior high-ish, Grandpa Hunter. I remember right where I was standing, and we kind of met there in this. You could go up or down into the basement and go up, and he said, and there was kind of a family gathering. We were just kind of moving around, and he said, John, he goes, just wanted to share a little thought with you. He goes, if you ever want to put somebody at ease, just ask them a question. Because people like to talk about themselves. Now, you guys, I don't remember hardly anything from that time period of wisdom or advice. And I'm surprised that came to my mind later in my life. But I think God made a deposit all those years ago that and through my grandfather, and that would be part of his legacy in my life. And now everything we do is about this now. And people do like to talk about themselves. So it works well to ask good questions. Sometimes you got to break out of these things we get into, like, well, what do you do? Where are you from? Where do you do? Well, why not ask them something else? Like, I'm tired. Say, I'm going to ask you a different question, like, who's your hero? That would shock them. They go, whoa, you can make me think. But, I've used that with some groups lately, and that's quite a discussion. You can get into something. And by the way, there's a little bit of a gospel opportunity there too. And if I was using that question, I would probably say, I've got, like Zig Ziglar talked about, I have a wall of gratitude. I've got all these names. There's not one that's prominent over any of the others, and all of them are essential to who I am and what I do today. And I could sit here and arrest you for 3 hours just talking about these people. But I'm going to just mention one because one brought them all together. And it was Jesus. My forgiver, my liberator. I should say I got the 3 L's. He's my liberator by forgiving me from all this big host of sins, but also just delivering me from me. And he's my life giver, eternal life, abundant life. And now he's my leader king. And you know what? I don't need to say much more than that. That's just true. It's honest, forthright, and that might be all there would be. But I would probably want to explore who their hero was a lot more. And so those are just some thoughts on that. Questions. So, by the way, these books, you can get a free version of all these Bob Tiede books on his website. It's a book, e-book type thing. So that's available to you. I hijack these. So I have one more question for you all to stop and just think about for a moment. Study buddies. And the question's here at the bottom of your page. And I would like you to take some good notes here. But what do you think just right is? Okay, we got this two extremes here, deficit, excess. what do you think when it comes to missional living and witness and evangelism and sharing our faith in Christ? What is just right? Take a crack at it. Make a few notes. Go ahead and talk a little bit. I kind of let two of my things out already. Curious, compelling questions and curious listening. So, okay, each of you take a little bit, a couple minutes each on this. And just so you can think. It's good to think and reflect. So I hope you're jotting some of your brilliant ideas down on your page. Just a word or a phrase is good. All right, we'll bring it back and take good notes. You guys all write those things down. Rebecca Pippert, this is a book that's been out a long time, out of the Salt Shaker. She said, Christians and non-Christians alike have something in common. We're both uncomfortable about evangelism. Okay, so that's why we're thinking about, well, what's just right? What can we do? And I don't know what all you came up with. I'm looking forward, actually, to reading through these and looking at these things, and maybe we'll revisit some of these comments next week, the next 4 weeks. But I was thinking about things that, we can feel guilty, we can feel shame about bad experiences, things we've done or didn't do. Oh, their blood is on my hands, I didn't say anything, or wow, I just nailed that guy to the cross. And and there's just too hot, too cold, too hard, too soft. It's just everywhere. It's so easy to go to the extremes, the vices. But it's hard. It takes practice and persistence. There was a young man, his dad set me up with a phone call with him, and he's a fairly new Christian, but he's just growing like crazy, just devouring his Bible. But his dad said now he just is coming at everybody, and especially family, just too hot and too hard. And his wife's an attorney, and she just said, you gotta like chill. And so we're having a discussion on the phone. He's thinking, he's a very teachable guy. And so he was willing to chat with me, and his dad set this up. I kid you not, 6 times in a 1-hour call, he started talking over me when I was saying something, and he caught himself. He didn't just keep going. He caught himself. He said, he goes, I'm sorry, John. I'm just started to talk over you. Okay, go ahead and finish what you're saying. And, probably about the 4th time in, I just stopped him and said, this is so endearing. I can't believe you're doing this. No one does that. And I said, I'm just really proud of you, for catching yourself, and owning it. What's wrong with that? So there's one of those extremes. The other side, sometimes we just are afraid to get out of the blocks because we go, well, what if they ask me something I don't know? Well, what if? So what if I ask a good question and they respond to that, and maybe they put a really big question up there and I go, I don't have any idea how to respond to that. Hey, what's wrong with just stopping and going, whoa, that is such a good question. I'm going to have to think about that for myself. I'm kind of tempted to try to give you an answer here, but I think that deserves a lot of thought. And, and then you go away and you come back, circle back, whatever, some days later, and say, do you remember when we were talking the other day, you asked that question? And I go, that is such a good question. I sat and thought about that for a bit, and then I decided to go ask some other people. I went on, I had some resources that I could go check out, and I came up with a couple of really interesting points that have kind of really firmed up my thoughts about that. I'm not done. That's a huge question, but these are just a couple of thoughts. What if I came back like that, and they just said, and we're kind of in process here, but I'm not coming in with the answer, with certitude, and it's perfect. They're rarely perfect. And but what if I did that? Would that not be more comfortable, more humble, doable, fun? That would be real science, because we're in this process of discovery together. And we're making a friend. And the discussion continues, so there's residual conversations, residual income, if you will, for the relationship. And I think people are just waiting for that kind of response. So, but how do you get it rolling? So there's a question that we've used for a lot of years. I told you I think about this stuff too much. And I wake up at 3 a.m. We have our issues, right? So, but oftentimes I'm working these problems. I'm going, how are we going to get your people, Lord, unleashed to open their mouths, or to open their mouths with grace and with, winsome approaches that are enduring. And So I was laying in bed, and this thought came to me, and I really think it was the Holy Spirit. He just said, I want you to ask that question. I'll tell you what the question is. I want you to ask your question, the adventure dinner question, to your group Friday morning. And that's Friday morning. And I go, yeah. But I want you to do it in front, ask this table server in front of the group, but don't tell them you're going to do it. Just do it. I go, that's a great idea. Did I come? No, I didn't come up with that. And I go, why did I not think of that, though? And I've used this question for years and years. It's always had a good response. And we use it, save it for our dinners, for these adventure dinners we do. And once in a while, will take it out, use it with somebody. So we show up at Rembrandt's. John Meyer was there. There was probably about 8 guys. And we're finishing up. I see our server coming across. She's got our check. And I go, okay, game on. And I said, guys, watch this. And it's kind of, when somebody says that, a dude says that, it's akin to hold my beer. I'm about to do something really stupid. And these guys actually quieted down, and they just kind of like, watch what? And she walks up and, hands this bill to us. I gave it to John. And then, that's true. So then I said, hey, you've probably overheard us talking a lot. We talk about a lot of God and life questions, and I know you've probably picked up some stuff, There's this one really interesting question that I would like to ask you, and I'm not looking for a correct answer or anything, just your quick response. You don't have to get into it, just kind of what comes first. And she goes, okay. And I said, well, okay, so this question assumes there's a God. And I don't know what you believe, but let's just assume that for the question. And you can ask God any question you want, or just take God to task on an issue. What would your question be, or your issue? And she goes, whoa! And her eyeballs darted up to the corner of the wall and the ceiling where they meet, and she just went catatonic. And we were like looking around, what is she doing? She was thinking. And then out of her soul comes, it was guttural. She just said, why? And I looked at the guys, and their eyeballs were like this big, and mine probably were too. And I said, why what? And she goes, what's the point of all this? She was asking the purpose question. And she was feeling it. She was struggling with that. And so the exercise was just to ask the question. And I let her, she added a couple other comments, and I said, hey, Sam, thank you. I said, thanks for sharing that. I go, man, that is such an important question. I said, we're all struggling with that. We're all thinking about that. Thanks for sharing that. That was it. Done. She walks away, and the guys go, what was that? One guy goes, did you set that up? And I go, well, somebody did. And then John, I still remember John saying, he goes, well, I could do that. Because that's not that hard. And guess what? I'm going to get you off the hook here. I was going to have him come up and tell his story. I challenged all those guys. I said, do you see how easy that was? You think you can remember that question? You just need, assuming there's a God, ask any question, and then put the suffix on the end, or take him to task on an issue. Kind of like, because there's some angry people out there. They would like to read God the Riot Act. Job wanted to. They've got some stuff to get off their chest. And I said, so you got to put that on to, and then they know they can be a little hostile, but it's not personal. It's personal with God, not with you. So anyway, I said, you guys, I want you all just go out and try that question. And so they did. I'll do John first. He was went into the sauna at the work. Were you at the club or someplace? And yeah. And he was sitting there, and he kind of, was looking. There was two women and a young guy. I think they were kind of related, but he said, "Hey, you guys," he goes, "You're millennials, and I've got this really interesting question I want." And so he threw it out, and they bit. John's a big fisherman, so fish on, 3 fish on, And he just had a really fun discussion with them, but that was it. And then another guy went down to Phoenix that weekend, and he happened to be golfing with some friends. And so into the 9th hole, snack girl comes by. He's going, "I got a minute or two here till we tee off again on the 10th. He goes, "I think I'll try the question on the snack girl." So he said, "Hey, I'm in this group in Boise, and we talk about these questions, and there's this one really interesting." And so he put it out to her. And I cannot repeat in church what her question was. It was, and then another word with a question mark. And Todd was just shocked. And then, you guys, she went off. He goes, "She schooled me." She went into this diatribe about everything wrong with planet Earth. And it was just boom, boom, boom. It was like bullet points. And he goes, "Well, thank you for sharing that." And that was all. He had his foursome was going to tee off, so he had an excuse. He got his Snickers bar and kind of went. So, you guys, I think it's amazing what comes up. What do you suppose comes up most of the time in these questions? It used to be, when I was with Search, and even with Crew, there was like about a dozen questions. We would train people how to answer. When I started at Hewlett-Packard, meeting with some guys up there, we had 12 guys going through the 12 most asked questions, starting with, "Can anyone know if God exists?" And then right on through, evil and suffering, is Jesus the only one, all these kind of things. And I've noticed that the list has shrunk a lot lately. When I ask the platinum, we call it the platinum question, by the way, because it's rare and enduring. It's a special question. We called it the golden question first, and we go, "No, it's going platinum because it's really good." And so, but it's really fascinating to me to listen to answers, and I would say 2 out of 3 responses are about the evil and suffering, pain, hardship, all that kind of stuff. People are asking serious questions. And then they may have different nuances, of course. Number 2 was what the gal at Rembrandt's asked. It's what's the point of it all? What's my purpose? And I've noticed, it's interesting, a lot of young women are asking that question. And I find that fascinating because the world's saying, "Hey, go, girl. Nothing will stop you. We're all cheering for you. You go do anything you want." And they're going, "Well, great, but I don't have the foggiest idea what to do or why I would be doing that." And then the third category, I'll use another P. I'm alliterating all over the place tonight. Personhood or maybe performance. And it usually kind of takes on one of these kind of things. God, what do you think of me? How am I doing? It used to be folks would say, "Hey, am I going to make it to heaven? Am I good enough?" And so there might be something like that. How good do you have to be? But now it's shifted a little bit. What do you think of me? And there's an identity thing going on. And how am I doing? What's the scorecard on me? And looking for maybe some approval. So here's what we have tried to do, and this is what we'll do the next few weeks. This book is broken down, so it starts, I have my story in there, and just pointing out the importance of questions, but then we go into the platinum question and pose that. And here's why that's a a good one to start with. It's fun. You can ask it with anybody almost. And you can just say, hey, I was at this class the other night, and this guy asked this question, or I got a book, and it's about this question. I'm wondering how you would answer it. So there's your in. But it starts with that, but then I think the real treasure is not just with that question. That gets it going. But it's what I do afterwards. And so I'm trying to encourage people to endure and to stay in the game and be a good listener, a curious listener. And so let's suppose, take the gal at Rembrandt. She says, what's the point of it all? What by purpose? And I'm just there with her alone, perhaps. And I would just say, wow, what a great question. So, I'm kind of curious. Of all the questions you could have asked, why that one? And you know what happens? They want to tell you. And they start opening up their life. And here's usually, and if it's a pain and suffering thing, you're going to get a serious story. So maybe a trauma or a loss or something. And wow, you better be in it, to listen with empathy. But they're granting you some sacred space. What an honor. You've earned it, though. Take your shoes off. So that might be all I want to do that day. That might be enough. And I go, wow, thanks, wow. But I can circle back and come back. And I was thinking about, when I asked you of all the questions, why that one, and thinking about that. I wonder, how would you answer that question for yourself right now? And you know what happens in most cases that I've run into? People are just shooting blanks. I don't know. I don't have any idea. And then question number 4. Well, who's in your life, or where would you go to find an answer like that? Do you have any resources or people to talk to? Like, how would you go even take that on? Shooting blanks. Air balls. That's shocking. I would at least say, well, go on Google. They don't even say that. And then there's another question. This is a little bold, but I'll say this. But I've earned the right to up to this point, and I say, so I got a kind of a curious question for you. Have you ever just thought, maybe I could just shoot that one up, my question up to God? You ever thought about that you could do that? And it's really funny to watch that, because you get one of two things. Most people, no, I really haven't thought about that. Or some people said, I did that. And I want to know that. So there's some kind of blockage, some kind of barrier. So I might, well, tell me about that. What happened, And so I might just hear it out. I don't have to answer anything. I don't have to deliver anything. So then I'm curious about something else. This is question number 6. And by the way, you can always go back and refer to this very simple little book with 700-word chapters to kind of be reminded of what these questions are. But I would probably say, so I'm curious about what would stop you from asking your question, and it might have to do with, well, who am I even asking? Like, why would I even want to ask God? What do I know about God that would cause me to think he would even care about that? Like, so what kind of, suppose you're going to just create your own God. What kind of God would you need? What kind of superpowers, would he need to have? What kind of moral perfections would he need? And you know what will happen? This is really dynamic in a group. I'll be sitting with a group of people, and I did this recently with a bunch of people that they're one of their very close childhood friends. Was a military guy, took his own life. These guys are rocked. And one of them said, let's get together and do this. So we did, and but here's what will happen. So we had a brainstorm one day. I said, well, guys, let's just kind of think about what God might be, could be, or what kind of God you need him to be to do a prayer like that. And so we brainstormed. What's interesting? People will come up This is kind of surprising, but they will, especially a group, will come up with a very biblical concept in terms of just listing attributes. I have a fascinating story with an atheist that's in this book named Randy. I asked him that question one day. And he came in, he said, Johnny, he goes, and he's kind of rethinking things a little bit, but he goes, I got this book and this guy, I just really am attracted to this notion that everybody has a calling. And I said, really? Wow. So I'm kind of curious, Randy, like, wouldn't that imply that there's someone doing the calling? And he kind of had this kind of quizzical, it's like, well, I guess it would. I said, well, let's think about that a little bit. What would that person have to be like? So yellow pad. And we just went through. I said, would he have to be creative? Would he have to be intelligent? Would he have, and we listed off kind of a whole bunch of things and he's getting suspicious now because I'm kind of baiting him a little bit. But I said, Randy, you just discovered intuitively the biblical God. Now it's just kind of a question of, can you know him? You know where I got that idea? I heard maybe Chuck Colson many years ago. I can't find the source of this, but somebody was talking about a group of PhD Chinese students in China, and philosophy students, working on PhDs. They sat around one day and they said, if there was a God, what would he have to be like? Just based on what we can see and what we're experiencing here. And they came up with a biblical model. Isn't that, oh my gosh. It almost gives you goosebumps. So the markers are out there. And then the last question, where would you even start? Let's suppose you're kind of wanting to move towards this God, but you go, well, how's he made himself known? Where would a guy even start? And studying, because there's a lot of religions and a lot of worldviews, where would you even start? And you know what? At that point, I think I've earned the right to say, I'd like to make a suggestion that's really worked out well for me. Why don't you start with the most audacious claims? The one that is the one who is included in everybody's portfolio. Most religions like to claim Jesus. He made the most audacious claims, claimed to be God in the flesh, and 11 out of the 12 major religions teach a system of works. Jesus talked about amazing grace. What a deal. And he's got some great perspective on all the evil stuff. So you guys, that's a little bit of an overview of that book. And I'm just going to close with this story. I got set up, a good setup, to go to lunch with a man in the mental health industry. One of his employees, she was struggling with trying to answer his questions. And she said, I know this guy that enjoys these kind of discussions, but would you be willing to do lunch with him? And he said, yeah. And so we met at Applebee's. We get there, and right out of the blocks, he is pushing hard on me. I mean, he gets intense right now. And I'm going, for a mental health professional, you're a little quirky. I didn't say that, but I'm just like, whoa. I mean, how about some small talk here? You like the Seahawks or the Broncos? Kind of. But he was coming hard. And so I just said, wow, I'm kind of waiting. I don't know quite what to do. I just want to get to know him a little bit but he's asking these questions. And I thought, okay, well, I'll venture in. I'll try to throw a nugget or two out on one of his questions. And as I started to do that, he just cut me off. And he hit me with another question. And he was getting loud. We're sitting there at one of the tall stools at Applebee's. And I'm just going, guys, it takes a lot to get me uncomfortable in social situations because I do so many dumb things that I'm kind of used to. But I was just feeling really uncomfortable with him. And finally, I prayed. I said, God, I don't know what to do. This guy, I don't know what to do. What do I do with this guy? I heard, not audible, but a very clear script in my head. Ask him if he's ever had an experience with me. And I go, what? I go, was that you? I didn't just come up with that. I've never done that before. I've never asked anybody. Actually, I do now, but up to that point, I had never done that. And I thought, what have I got to lose? And I said, well, hey, I've got a question for you. Have you ever experienced God? And you guys, it's as if somebody snapped his neck. Because he's kind of like this, and then all of a sudden he goes, yes. And he just dropped his head and just slumped in his chair. And I didn't know what to do. I was like, oh my gosh. And I said, well, could you tell me about it? And he did a little bit. But I could tell there was something really serious had happened in his life. Some trauma. It had something to do with a family member, I think. But but he couldn't go there to really tell me the darkness of it. So we ended our time, and I just said, hey, if you ever want to chat some more, I'm on tap. Call me. You know how to get a hold of me, stuff. And I just want you to know I'm, willing to talk. And thanks for sharing what you did. And that was it. It was one and done. Billy Graham, I think it was Billy Graham. We haven't been able to find this source. We'll give him credit because he usually says all the right things about evangelism. But he said, it takes 30 people to lead someone to Christ. 29 think they've done nothing, and one thinks he's done everything. And you know what? Maybe I was number 17 in that guy's life. And it was enough. And I just relaxed with that, so that's good. Well, guys, God is talking to people. And he will talk to us about talking to people. He is the good shepherd. His sheep hear his voice. And he says, I got other sheep too. And we need to get out and reach the lost and the scattered. And I'm suggesting the just right way to do this that anyone can enter into. Even it will still feel awkward, but everything worth doing is awkward, isn't it? Play the piano, awkward. Learn to hit a baseball, awkward. Anything, golf clubs, anything you do is just awkward at first. So it's okay. Practice the question, maybe with each other. And we'll do that a little bit. And we'll unpack some of these things and have a more intimate time together somewhere else in this building. And you'll hear where. By the way, so you owe me. Matt, come on up. If you want to do the Great Exchange, you get a book for that. You got to turn that page in. And the Welcome Center outside, the books are there. John Meyer will be out there. And if you want to just buy a book, you didn't take good notes, you can have a book for $10. And anyway, Matt, what else needs to be said?
No, that was perfect. Thank you. It's some really good practical stuff to glean from you and to learn and to take out into our everyday. One of the things I did say, and I realized that I'm a teller. I'm the interrupter. We hung out last night, and you're asking me questions, and I'm sitting here trying to tell you. So I'm constantly listening, trying to come up with a response. And so it's fantastic for me to just learn how to ask the right question. So and stop interrupting me. No, I'm joking. But yeah, I was gonna say, make sure you exchange this for a book, and then this was just the tip of the iceberg. And so if you do want to continue on with this for the next 4 weeks, it will be in Building 500, and jump on CalvaryBoise.com and just register so that we know how many to plan for. But thank you so much for being here.
My honor.
Let me pray, and then we'll dismiss. So if you got kids, you can head over and grab them. Heavenly Father, thank you for just tonight, Lord, that we can come into your house and learn and grow and be challenged to think about the approach that we are taking into our evangelism techniques, if we even do. Lord, I pray for those that are like me that might be a little bit too soft, maybe a little bit too timid, and not sure if I have the ability. Lord, I pray that we would recognize your Holy Spirit being alive and active in our lives, that we would rely on the Holy Spirit when it comes in to do with our relationship with others and our boldness to share the belief that we have in you, and to do it just with genuineness. And I do also pray for the one that might be sitting in here going, man, maybe I've taken too hard of an approach. Lord, may that person also rely on you in just the opportunities that you might bless them with. Thank you for John. Lord, I pray that you would bless him as he pours out to us for the next few weeks. Lord, I just pray that you would give him favor in the classroom and in this opportunity as well. So we give you all the praise, the honor, and the glory. It's in your name we pray. Amen.
It's 8 o'clock.
It's 8 o'clock.
Exactly.
On the dot. Nailed it.
You were perfect. He disrupted me at just the right time. Perfect. Hey, you guys, this guy had an amazing impact on my son, Jason, in particular. Jason, we didn't go to Matt's church where he was a youth pastor, but we had a lot of friends there. But Jason went there because all of his friends were there. But he connected up with this guy and all the boys. They just love this guy. So you're really blessed to have him in a different role.
Different role, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
What's funny is I texted a picture of you to Jason, and he sent back a smiley face with heart eyes. So he thinks very highly of you as well. So anyway, excellent. Thanks for coming tonight, and we'll see you next week.